I don't know about you, but I can still remember that teenage angst, the feeling like I didn't fit in, not anywhere. I wasn't athletic, smart, talented, or fashionable enough to fit comfortably into any of the cliques or groups that populated my high school. I hung out on the edges of this group or that, but I did not have that tribe of peers where I felt like I belonged, except at my Unitarian Universalist church. There I was part of a small youth group that met religiously each Sunday for 4 years, and with reunions well beyond. There, I didn't have to fit in. I belonged. And it speaks to that belonging that my 4 friends from that time remain the only folks that I have kept in touch with from my high school years. Reverend Kim Debus, a Unitarian Universalist minister and worship consultant, writes a blog entitled "Hold My Chalice," which I have found both helpful and challenging. She always invites me to think more deeply about the ideas and practices that I, and maybe all of us, might take for granted. This week's blog focused on the difference between fitting in and belonging. She writes, "We like to think of Unitarian Universalism as an outsider faith, but we also like being insiders. Over and over again, we hear people saying they loved finding like-minded people and felt like they'd found a place to fit in. People didn't seem to come to Unitarian Universalism as much as they came from Catholicism or Judaism or Protestant Christianity or other faith traditions. And there they found other refugees who had various struggles with monotheism or doctrine or dogma. So I imagine many of us could resonate with her observations. But she goes on. And when those who did not fit in also arrived, well, they didn't feel like they belonged. Because while we say words like, "we welcome everyone," there can be subconscious judgment in the ways we judge where people live or work, or just the ways they express their gender or sexuality, or how we tokenize people of color, or how we set up expectations of financial contributions, or how we struggle to accommodate accessibility for all in favor of comfort or aesthetics. But even more subtly than that, she writes, we often emphasize congregational culture and a belief that we have a common theological perspective, usually humanism or religious naturalism, and push back still against the language of reverence. And then we wonder why people don't stay. It's not because they don't belong, it's because they don't fit in. When I read that, I felt some chagrin, recognizing that my little youth group, where I finally felt I belonged, was not particularly welcoming to the next class of youth who tried to join us when they reached high school. The 5 of us were so close and spent so much time together that we forgot we were supposed to be a youth group. And when the new kids tried to join us, after a couple of months, they dropped out. And I understand. We were so relieved to have finally found a place where we could authentically be ourselves. We didn't really know how to make room for others with whom we did not feel an immediate comfort or like-mindedness. And as I reflect on that dynamic, it reminds me a little of the Puritan founders of this congregation and the other first parishes around Massachusetts. They fled religious persecution in England and found religious freedom here, and in turn became intolerant of other religions that came into being. I've looked at the diary of Reverend Ebenezer Bridge. He's out there now. minister here from 1741 to 1792. He was horrified when the emotional and spirit-led evangelism of the Baptists, probably the Methodists and the Universalists too, arrived in Chelmsford during the Great Awakening revival movement of the 18th century, challenging the scholarly Enlightenment approach of the established congregational, aka First Parish churches across Massachusetts. Christine Lee Harriman from the University of Delaware writes about this time. Throughout the colonies, conservative and moderate clergymen questioned the emotionalism of evangelicals and charged that disorder and discord attended the revivals. There was dancing. They took great exception to itinerants, ministers who traveled from one community to another, preaching and all too often criticizing local clergy. And they took still greater exception when some white women and African Americans shed their subordinate social status long enough to exhort religious gatherings. Evangelical preachers and converts rejoined by lambasting their opponents as cold, uninspiring, and lacking in piety and grace. Battles raged within congregations and whole denominations over this challenge to clerical authority, as well as the evangelical approach to conversion from the heart rather than the head. When I read that, I thought, wow, the more things change, the more they stay the same. As human beings, we seek belonging, even the most introverted among us. We are relational creatures who need to be part of a tribe, a community, a village, some other group of human beings for our physical, emotional, and spiritual survival. While it is easy to confuse belonging with fitting in, Brené Brown notes that they are actually the opposites of one another. Fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. Even before the pandemic, the religious landscape in this country has been changing. The fastest growing religious group is the Nones, N-O-N-E-S, and the Dones, D-O-N-E-S. People who have never joined, who have permanently left religious communities. Joining a religious community used to be a civic expectation. Unitarian Universalism provided a place to belong for folks who could not find a theological home in the more orthodox religions, as Colleen shared this morning, but who still sought other aspects a faith community offered, like fellowship and mutual care, spiritual exploration, rites of passage, service to others. But that's challenged as there are now many secular alternatives to most of what religious communities can provide. And with the pressure on families of balancing work and school and extracurricular activities, there's little time for Sunday morning church. But as we have come out of the pandemic, and as we witness social upheaval and the unfolding climate disruption and threats to life on our planet, I'm reading more and more articles about people, young people in particular, who are looking for a spiritual home, a place where they can make meaning out of what is unfolding around us. If people are coming to religious communities at all, they are not coming out of a civic sense of responsibility. They are coming out of an existential search, existential search for belonging, seeking community grounded in a shared longing to explore the meaning of life. That's what existential means. To find hope and purpose, to find support in the face of loneliness, despair, and grief. To be seen and known for who they are, not just what they do. To engage with and in a sacred spirit larger than themselves. People are seeking sanctuary. Given this, we might expect folks to be beating down the doors to join our Unitarian Universalist congregations. Isn't this who we are? A place for spiritual seekers and doubters and learners. We don't require adherence to old, tired, lifeless creeds. Do we not welcome everyone as they are, all the nations and tribes of race and gender, identity and sexual orientation, differently abled, social class, ethnicity? Do we not welcome people of all theological stripes, atheist and theist, agnostic, spiritual but not religious, Buddhist, pagan, humanist, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, maybe even Christian? The answer is yes and no. Perhaps not as well as we would like to believe. Back to Dr. Reverend Kim Debus. For some of us, when we came into our faith community, our whole selves, with the fullness of all that we are and all we have experienced, were welcomed, and we found we belonged. And somewhere along the line, we forgot that we aren't the measure of all that is welcome. It's the whole, there is no such thing as normal idea. We have to welcome others with an openness that says, your whole self, with the fullness of all that you are and all that you have experienced, belongs here. And we will learn about you as you learn about us, and we will love you, all of you. And she goes on, and we need to not just say it, but do it. We must examine our biases, consider those things we ask of others that are about leaving their whole selves at the door, and make changes to how we welcome each other. Let's stop looking for like-minded people and start saying yes to true belonging. This is how we draw the circle of love wide. That last sentence, this is how we draw the circle of love wide, is important. Not just because of its call to a more inclusive welcome, but because a circle, no matter how large, does have boundaries. Some beliefs and some behaviors contradict or violate the promises that we make in our First Parish covenant and in our UUA covenant about right relationship with one another, with the interdependent web of this sacred earth, with the holy. There are beliefs and practices that deny the humanity of others and support the power of one group of people over others, that require fitting in over belonging. As Unitarian Universalists, we claim that love and freedom are at the center of our circle, at the heart of our congregational and UUA covenants. It is from this center that we gather for worship, mutual care, faith formation, and service to the common good. It is from this center that this most important practice of extending welcome, belonging, is rooted. Yesterday, I and the members of our standing committee, which is our governing board, spent our Saturday with UU congregational boards from around New England at a workshop ostensibly about the issues facing our congregations returning from the pandemic. But the heart of it was about welcoming people to belong to our congregations. In particular, welcoming the nuns and the duns who are seeking the spiritual sanctuary we offer, but whose lives may not fit in with the way we have always done things. We need to reimagine and adapt our welcome if we wish to nurture belonging. welcome, hospitality is one of the most ancient and important practices of religious community, of human community. It is necessary for our survival. Let us remember, too, that a practice is just that, something we commit to do intentionally and ritually, with the awareness that we will never be perfect at it, that we will always be learning. That is why it is important that we keep practicing. Keep practicing wholehearted. We bid you welcome, welcome to those of us who are new and those of us who have been here for a while, wherever we are on our journey, whoever we are, and whatever is calling our spirit and our heart into a community to be heard and to be held, to be inspired and to be challenged. As we begin this new year together, I invite you to get curious about how and where our worship, our pastoral care, our faith formation and spiritual learning, our social justice and outreach, our stewardship and governance, where are we welcoming of belonging, and where do we require fitting in? And how might we reimagine them to grow in our welcoming practice of belonging?